Good evening, I'm Driti Atri and you're watching Skyline's first episode. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we begin with America, country built by immigrants, a country that proudly calls itself the land of opportunities. Now for generations, millions have arrived over there carrying their dreams in their suitcases and hope in their hearts. But today, immigration is once again at the center of a political storm. In fact, the language that is becoming sharper, the divide is becoming deeper, and the whole debate, it is getting louder. US President Mr. Donald Trump, he has made headlines once again. Well, he took to social media platform with a statement that immediately sparked reaction across the political spectrum. His message, it was short, but it was explosive. While he wrote, if you import people from third world country, you quickly become the third world country. Just one sentence, yet powerful enough to ignite conversation across America. Now think about this for a moment here. America is a nation where almost everyone can track their roots back to another country. Well, whether it's Ireland, whether it's Italy, Mexico, China, India, Africa, or elsewhere. The story of America has always been closely tied to migration. And that is exactly why statements like these generate such an intense debate. Supporters of Mr. Trump says that he is talking about illegal immigration. They argue that his concerns are focused on border security, economic pressure, and the challenges of managing large-scale migration. However, here critics see the whole statement very differently. They believe the language it is divisive and unfairly paints millions of immigrants with the same brush. As a result, America once again finds itself asking a very familiar question. Who gets to define what it means to be an American? But this story is more about just one social media post. It comes at a time when immigration has become one of the most fiercely debated issues in the United States. Well, recently the Trump administration faced a setback when a court blocked a proposed fee that was linked to H-1B visa. Basically a category used by thousands of highly skilled foreign professionals, including many Indians here. Mr. Trump, he responded by criticizing federal judges, accusing them of standing in the way of his immigration agenda. So this is no longer just political statement. It is part of a much larger battlefield. Basically a battle over borders, a battle over jobs, and a battle over national identity. And as America moves closer to another election year, well, immigration is expected to remain one of the most powerful and emotional issues that is shaping the country's future. Here one thing is certain. This debate is not ending anytime soon. In fact, it appears to be getting louder with every passing day. And yes, while the US president continued debating immigration in the press conferences, thousands of ordinary migrants are living the consequences of these policies every single day. And our next story, it is about one such reality here. Can you imagine leaving your home, leaving your family, spending your life savings, and crossing continents just in search of a better future? Now imagine ending up in a detention center, thousands of kilometers away from home, waiting day after day, month after month, with no clear answer about what happens next. Well, that is the reality of a Gujarati couple from India, whose story has become a powerful example of how complicated immigration system can change lives forever. The husband and wife reportedly entered the United States through Canada in 2023. Like many other migrants, they applied for asylum and they waited for their case to move through the whole system. But while paperwork moved slowly, life expenses, they continued to pile up. Well, according to reports, the couple began working at a convenience store in Mississippi. The problem was that their work permit had not yet arrived. Their immigration paperwork was still pending, and then came the turning point. Immigration authorities reportedly raided the store and detained the couple. Since then, they have spent 7 months in detention. Well, what makes the whole story even more striking is that the couple is reportedly not fighting deportation anymore. They have already signed their removal papers and they are willing to return to India. Yet they remain in detention because another obstacle has now emerged: documentation. Their passports were reportedly left behind during their journey through Canada. making the deportation process far more complicated now. In other words, they cannot stay, but they cannot leave either. Well, their future, it is trapped in paperwork. Every day becomes a waiting game for them. Every week brings more and more uncertainty. Their lawyer continues trying to secure their release though, but without a court hearing and without proper travel document. Well, progress that remains painfully slow. This whole story, it also highlights a large trend in the US where many undocumented immigrants are spending longer period in detention as immigration policies become stricter and enforcement becomes more aggressive. Now for this Gujarati couple, the American dream has turned into a bureaucratic nightmare. And for countless others, their story serves as a reminder that migration is not only about crossing borders. Sometimes it is about surviving the system that follows. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, while some Indians, they are struggling to stay in America, many others are now considering whether they want to go there at all or not. Well, the reason lies in another major shift unfolding across the American universities. For decades, the formula, it was very simple. Study hard, get good grades, secure admission to a very reputed university, and if possible, make it to America. Now, for generations of Indian families, the United States represented opportunity, prestige, the promise of better life. It was the final destination where ambitious students wanted to be and where parents dreamt of seeing their children succeed. But today that dream, it appears to be facing new challenges. Fresh data suggests that the number of Indian students heading to the United States, it is beginning to decline. And the trend that is now visible even in specialized courses such as law school. According to recent figures, applications from Indian students to American law schools have dropped significantly. The whole decline, it is not limited to India alone, but Indian students, they remain one of the largest international groups studying in the United States, which makes the trend particularly important. The obvious question is, what has changed? Here, the answer, it appears to be uncertain. That's right, over the last few years, student visa processes have become more and more complicated. Screening measures have increased, waiting period have also been longer. Many students, they are facing delays while others worry about visa approval altogether. Can you imagine receiving admission to your dream university, celebrating with your family, your friends, preparing for the next chapter of your life, and then finding yourself stuck in a lengthy visa process with no clear timeline? Now, for many families here, investing a lot of amount of money in overseas education, that uncertainty, it can become a major concern. Ladies and gentlemen, the whole conversation, it's no longer only about education. It is increasingly about what happens after graduation. Students today, they are asking difficult questions. Will there be enough job opportunities? Will work visa be available now? Will immigration policies become even stricter in near future? Can they realistically build long-term career in America? And at the very same time, countries like Canada, Australia, Germany, Singapore, the United Kingdom, they are aggressively attracting international students, offering the alternative pathway for education and employment. Though America still possesses some of the finest universities in the world, and that reputation remains intact. But confidence plays a key role in student decision here, and when confidence begins to weaken, numbers begin to change. Well, the latest figures suggest that while the American dream remains alive, it is no longer as straightforward or as certain as it once seemed. But immigration and education are not the only issue creating division in America. One of the country's most prestigious campuses, a graduation ceremony turned into a political protest, putting one of the world's most powerful technology companies right in the middle of that controversy. Well, a graduation ceremony is usually like a celebration. It is the day students wait for after years of assignment, maybe exams, deadlines, sleepless nights. Families travel long distances to watch their children receive the degrees. Camera flash, speeches, and graduates prepare to step into the next chapter of their lives. But at Stanford University, one of America's most prestigious institutions, this year's ceremony, it took a very different turn. The chief guest was Google's CEO, Mr. Sundar Pichai, one of the most successful technology leaders in the world. and a role model for millions of students, specifically Indians. Well, as he began speaking, hundreds of students reportedly stood up and walked out. Their message loud and clear. They chanted slogans in support of Palestine and protested Google's aligned involvement in the projects that were linked to Israel. Within minutes, what was supposed to be a graduation speech, it became a political statement. Well, the whole protest quickly spread far beyond the campus. Social media exploded with reactions. Some praised the students for exercising their rights to protest and holding very powerful institutions accountable. But others, they criticized them for disrupting a graduation ceremony and disrespecting a guest who had come to inspire the graduating class. Well, the whole debate, it became even bigger when a very prominent Indian-American investor, Vinod Khosla, and the US Congressman Ro Khanna, they publicly disagreed over the incident. One side argued that innovation and technology have transformed billions of lives and deserve some kind of recognition. The others argued that students have every right to question corporations and challenge authorities. This whole incident reflects a much bigger trend here. Universities across America are increasingly becoming battlegrounds for political debates. In fact, issues that once belonged to the politicians, they are now being discussed by students, by professors and activists. From war overseas to artificial intelligence, from climate change to corporate responsibility, it's the campuses that are becoming the arsenal here, where young people, they are demanding answers. The Stanford protest, it was not just about Sundar Pichai. It was about the growing willingness of students to challenge powerful institutions, even on one of the biggest days of their lives. And yes, speaking of technology giant, another story from Silicon Valley that is raising serious question about what happens when job losers collide with immigration rule. Now, for most of the people, losing a job, it is stressful. It brings uncertainty, it brings financial pressure, difficult decision. But for thousands of foreign workers in America, losing a job, it can mean something much bigger. It can put their entire future in the country at risk. Well, a recent case involving a former Meta employee has drawn a lot of attention to this reality. Reports suggest that a worker who lost their job during Meta's latest round of layoffs, he was later detained by immigration authorities. This news, it spread through internal employee discussions, creating a lot of concern among the colleagues who feared that losing employment had triggered a much larger immigration crisis. Now, to understand why this matters, it is very important to understand how America's immigration system really works for the skilled workers here. Well, thousands of workers, professionals, they live and work in the US on employer-sponsored visa. The legal right to remain in the country, it is often directly connected to their jobs. Now here, if employment ends, the clock starts ticking. Workers may have only a limited period of time to find another job, secure a different visa, or leave the country. Now imagine facing that situation during a period of mass layoff. Well, technology companies have spent the last 2 years reducing their workforce. In fact, thousands of highly skilled professionals, they have suddenly found themselves searching for jobs in an increasingly competitive market. Well, here for thousands of foreign workers, the pressure is even greater because every passing day can affect their immigration status. Well, the reported Meta case, it has sparked renewed conversation about the vulnerabilities that are faced by international employees here. These are the professionals who contribute to some of the world's biggest companies. Yet, many remain dependent on immigration system that can change their lives, and that too overnight. Now, for them, a layoff is not simply a career setback. It can become an immigration emergency. And yes, while technology companies are cutting jobs, another global giant is preparing for one of the biggest workforce reduction in its history. Well, for generations, the BBC has been more than just a broadcaster. It has been one of the world's most trusted news organizations. Its journalists, they have reported from war zones, covered historic events, and informed millions of viewers across the globe. But today, even this media giant is facing difficult questions about survival in a rapidly changing world. Well, the BBC is reportedly preparing major cost-cutting measures that can affect around 2,000 jobs. the foreign organization that employs more than 20,000 people. This move, it represents one of the most significant reconstructing efforts in recent years. The whole decision comes as the broadcaster attempts to reduce the cost and prepare for the future financial challenges. What makes the whole story important is that it reflects a problem facing media organizations worldwide. The way people consume news, it is changing. Audience, they are rapidly changing. They are going to social media platform, maybe podcasts or live streaming. Traditional broadcasters, they are now facing intense competition for both attention and advertising revenue. Results, mass layoff. In the meantime, the proposed cuts, they are expected to impact several departments, including news operations. Now, for the journalists and for the media professionals, the whole announcement, it is a reminder that no industry is completely immune to economic pressure here. Technology, retail, hospitality, and now media. Job cuts are appearing across multiple sectors. In the meantime, the BBC's decision also raises a broader question. In an era where misinformation spreads faster than ever, can news organizations afford to reduce the resources here, or is this simply the reality of a changing media landscape? Whatever the answer is, one thing is definitely clear. The challenges facing traditional media are far from over. And yes, as jobs become harder to secure and immigration pathway became more complicated, another major development is now affecting wealthy Indians hoping to settle permanently in America. For many people moving to America, it begins with a student visa. For others, it starts with a work permit. But there is another route that has attracted investors from all around the globe. The EB-5 Investor Visa Program. It offers a pathway to permanent residency in exchange for significant investment in the American economy. Now, that pathway, it has hit a temporary roadblock for the Indian applicants. That's right, that's a sad news for Indians here. The US government has announced that the annual quote available under a major EB-5 category, it has exhausted for Indian nationals. In simple terms, no additional visas under that category can be issued until the next allocation cycle begins. For many families here waiting for the approval, the news, it means more delay and more uncertainty. The EB-5 program, it was designed to attract the foreign investment while creating jobs inside the United States. Investors, they are required to commit substantial amount of money just to qualify the project and meet very strict job creation requirement. Over the years, many Indians, they have used this particular route as a way to secure permanent residency for themselves and their families. However, demand has now surged, and when demand exceeds supply, waiting list that becomes longer. Ladies and gentlemen, the latest development is yet another reminder of how competitive America's immigration system has become. Whether it is student visa, work permit, or investor category, demand continues to outpace the availability here. Now, for many Indian families planning long-term moves to the United States, the message is clear. Immigration planning is becoming increasingly complex and delays are becoming a normal part of that process. But while some Indians are waiting for permission to enter America, another story has sparked outrage because it involves Indians who never made it home. International diplomacy often plays out behind closed doors, right? Governments discuss disagreements quietly, ambassadors, they exchange messages, and officials, they work just to avoid public confrontation. But sometimes an accident, it is so serious that it forces the governments to speak openly. And that is exactly what happened after a tanker carrying Indian crew members came under an attack by the United States. The whole incident resulted in the death of 3 Indian nationals and immediately triggered concern in New Delhi. Now here, according to the American officials, the vessel had reportedly ignored multiple warnings before military action was taken. The warnings allegedly included radio messages, visual signals, and other attempts to stop the ship. US authorities argue that their forces followed established procedures before opening fire. However, for India, the focus is not on procedure. The focus is on the loss of the human lives. 3 Indian sailors, they never returned home. 3 families received devastating news, and that is why the matter quickly moved far beyond military explanation and became a diplomatic issue. India has reportedly conveyed its concern to the US and sought accountability regarding the circumstances surrounding the death here. While both the countries continue to maintain strong strategic relation, incidents like this, like civilian casualty, always create difficult questions. And yes, at the heart of this story lies a simple reality. Behind every geopolitical dispute are ordinary people whose lives they can be changed forever in a matter of seconds. And finally tonight, for those who are planning to move overseas, our last story, it answers a question many people forget to ask until it is too late. Well, when people move abroad, their checklist is usually long. Visas, airline tickets, accommodation, health insurance, university admission, job contracts. Everything demands attention. In the middle of all of this, one thing, it often gets ignored. What about your bank account at home? After all, the account still works. Money can still be transferred. UPI may still function. Online banking remains active. Everything appears normal. So naturally, many people assume that there is nothing to worry about, right? But financial experts say that assumptions can create problems later on. Well, when an Indian citizen becomes a non-resident Indian or an NRI, their banking requirements change. Banks generally expect their customers to update their residential status and convert the regular resident account into the appropriate NRI category. The objective is not to create any unnecessary paperwork though, it is to ensure accounts are being operated under the correct regulations here. Well, in the meantime, many people they postpone their update because there seems to be no immediate consequences. Well, the account it continues functioning and daily banking activities that remains unaffected. The issue it often emerges later during KYC verification, account review, or maybe specific financial transactions. At that point of time, banks may request documentation and clarification regarding the residential status here. And the good news is that modern banking has become much more flexible now. Many NRIs, they continue to use digital banking service, mobile application and internet banking and even UPI now, depending on their bank's policy. The key is to ensure that the account structure reflect the customer's actual residential status. Well, it may sound like a small detail to you, but for Indians living overseas, it can save significant complications in the future because, let's be honest, sometimes the most important financial decisions are the ones people forget to make. And with that, it's a wrap up of our edition of Skyline tonight. I'm Driti Atri. Thank you for watching and I'll see you again with more stories, more insight and closer look at the headlines shaping our world. Good night.